Dan and Amy, so this week, some news on Obamacare. In addition to the Trump presser yesterday, Molina Healthcare, which was seen as an Obama success story for a bit, ain't anymore. Lost $110 million last year. They're pulling out of Obamacare, not offering plans next year. That's on top of Aetna and Humana. The Aetna CEO calling Obamacare a death spiral. And Trump yesterday, amid everything else that he talked about, mostly the media, did mention that Obamacare repeal would go first with tax reform to follow, and seemed to indicate that would all happen before the August congressional recess. Adam Kinzinger, who we had on yesterday, congressman from Central Illinois, said the same thing, that particularly on tax reform. And Steve Forbes, of course, great entrepreneurial capitalist and publisher of Forbes magazine. But he was on, I think it was CNBC last week, and he was putting it in no uncertain terms that there needs to be a sense of urgency to what the president and what the Congress does on tax reform.
Already now, they're backing off on health care. They're backing off on the tax thing. They don't get something done soon, they're going to be in big trouble economically and politically, especially in 2018. They could lose the House if they botch this thing on taxes.
But we are literally less than a month into the game here. And, even I was at, Joe's not here. It's hard. You can't declare it a failure already.
No, but you can see they're already bringing about unnecessary divisions on the tax side. I mean, we've been in this tax game for years.
Well, let's talk about some of those unnecessary divisions with the aforesaid Steve Forbes, chairman, editor-in-chief, Forbes Media, of course, former Republican presidential candidate, co-author of Reviving America. Steve, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Dan. Thank you.
So the divisions, the unnecessary divisions on tax reform, I mean, aren't there, though, some substantive disagreements on things like the border adjustment tax and the elimination of certain deductions that need to be squared away before the thing can move?
Yeah, the big one is the so-called border adjustment tax, which is really a 20% sales tax on stuff we bring into the country. And the effect of that 20% sales tax will be, for example, a gallon of gasoline will go up 30 cents. Anything you buy at Walmart, Kmart, Target, and other stores are going to go up. It's going to take over $120 billion a year out of the hands of consumers, working families, middle-class families. And for Republicans to be proposing this new tax, they say, well, we need the money to cut other taxes. Well, the purpose of tax cuts is to cut taxes, not create new taxes. So why go through this complicated exercise that punishes consumers, gives huge subsidies to companies like Boeing? You know, Boeing is selling $16 billion of airplanes to the mullahs in Iran. Under this Republican proposal, that $16 billion would be free of tax. So they're punishing American consumers, asking American consumers to subsidize companies like Boeing. It makes no sense.
But so here's the thing, though. Now, Steve Moore, a good free market economist, and Art Laffer, they're on board. They're advocates for this border adjustment tax. So how do we get to agreement within Republican circles on what the tax reform plan is going to look like when there are real philosophical differences between free market types?
Well, the good news is that Art Laffer opposes this border adjustment tax. So Steve Moore is defending it solo. And the way you deal with it is you drop it. They don't know what impact this is going to have on various businesses and their supply chains around the world. We do know it's going to slam American consumers, and retailers will tell you that. Prices are going to go up if this 20% sales tax goes in. So just drop it and do a simple tax cut like Ronald Reagan did. We know what to do. Just go and do it instead of dividing your allies, delaying tax reform. And given all the stuff that's happening in Washington, they do need to get a big tax cut to get this economy really roaring ahead. So people see that things are positively changing.
And to lower healthcare prices, I mean, we need competition, and all these companies have pulled out. Is there any possibility that you could see in the future where we have transparency for prices, where you require hospitals and clinics to post their prices for all the treatments and the consumer can decide what to do?
That's exactly right. One of the problems is there isn't pricing, what they call pricing transparency. Give you one quick example. I was with a friend in New Hampshire a few months ago. He had a heart problem, so he goes to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist says, among other things, you should have what they call a nuclear stress test, the blood flows or whatever. And so he asked what the test would cost. The doctor didn't know. He said insurance will cover it. But this guy went out and got the prices, hard work, from 25 different hospitals and clinics in the New England area. And the prices range from $1,400 to $7,300. I guarantee you if those prices had to be posted, just like with hotels and airlines and everything else, you would see those pricing differences shrink, and it would save patients literally billions of dollars.
President Trump said yesterday in that wide-ranging consciousness streaming press conference he held that the sequencing is going to be healthcare reform, then tax reform. And he seemed to indicate that this was not in the this was in the offing. This would happen, of course, before the fall recess. Were you satisfied with how he addressed those issues?
Well, I think the difficulties, and he's now got Tom Price, this is new Secretary of Health and Human Services, I think is beginning to discover trying to get the changes they want in healthcare is going to be a hard slog. They're going to have to do it, I think, piece by piece, especially in things like pricing transparency and other needed reforms. And on the tax side, I hope they they don't focus on one to the exclusion of the other. Get the tax thing going. You can make positive changes like pricing transparency on health care, but they got to get the tax thing really moving, and don't put in a tax increase. Make it a pure tax cut, a bold one, and make it retroactive to January 1st so that people see right away in their next paycheck, by golly, good things are beginning to happen. Not only means you get to keep more of what you earn, but also means businesses and entrepreneurs can be making more investments, which bodes for a much better future.
We've also seen legislation advance in both chambers to wind down and defund the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, to repeal DoddFrank in toto. How important is it to get that done before the year's out?
I think it's important to attack that agency, which is unconstitutional. And by the way, because they don't have to get their money from Congress, they get to have, in effect, the Federal Reserve gives them whatever money they want. It's the ultimate ATM. They just ask for billions of dollars, and hundreds of millions of dollars, and they get it, which is why hundreds of people now working for that agency get six-figure salaries, $100,000, $200,000, $250,000 a year. It's a shocker, and so, but that should take. They first should do taxes, then health care, and then terrible things like that so-called Consumer Protection Agency, which has just really become a rip-off of consumers and hurting banks, especially small community banks.
And what do you think should happen to DoddFrank when you're talking about small community banks?
I think they should throw most of it away. The thing about Dodd-Frank is it's enormously increased costs. Big banks can absorb those costs. Smaller banks have a harder time doing it. It's one reason why it's so difficult to get a loan. You get a mortgage, you have to go through, almost sign your life away in, 18,000 pieces of paper they keep demanding. And that slows the economy down. And the thing about Dodd-Frank, is if they had Dodd-Frank 10 years ago, before the crisis of 2008, we still would have had the crisis. It would not have prevented the crisis. That's the real joke about Dodd-Frank. Immense costs on lenders, especially small lenders, but it wouldn't have prevented the crisis.
And going back to Trump tax policy, look, the president is much more of a protectionist than you are, for example, or I am. And so if there's a demand from the president, from the White House, for tariffs or some border adjustment tax or something else that is in keeping with his vision of America first, how would you try and navigate those waters so that you get the personal and corporate income tax reductions, the structural tax relief on productive activity, and minimize the negative impacts of protectionist policy?
Well, on the border adjustment tax, that 20% sales tax, we have to hammer home But this is taxing the very people who put Donald Trump into the White House, that gave Republicans control of the government. It's working families, middle-class families, the hardest. So don't punish the people who help put you in and whose prosperity is going to be critical for getting this economy, future prosperity, getting this economy off the maps. And so that part, I think you can make the argument, don't punish the American consumer. We need to help the American consumer. And as for tariffs or taxes, I'm not in favor of putting taxes on anything, but if they put a tax on a specific product, we can absorb that. It's this across-the-board 20% sales tax that we really have to worry about that just sweeps everything in. And a specific tariff, you have to get through Congress, and you can have a debate about it, especially if a country is violating the trade rules like China. We have remedies in place to deal with it. And then you can do a specific tariff because they've been violating the rules. So that's very different from this 20% sales tax they want to put on your gasoline and everything you buy at Walmart.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. He is Steve Forbes, chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media, former Republican presidential candidate, co-author of Reviving America. Steve, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Amy. Have a good one.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.